Good evening, everybody, once again. My name is Geoffrey Villa from Tanzania Network. The topic we have today is the infrastructure projects, or the mega projects in Tanzania, where we talk about I think you've all heard about the standard gauge railway, which has been up and running a few months. And with me today, we have Thabit Jacob. Unfortunately, Thabit cannot share his video because he's currently in Ghana, where he's mentioned that he'll be having some connection issues, but I think we should be able to have a good audio from him as well. So maybe before we go further, I would like to give Thabit a chance to introduce himself, please.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Godfrey, and good evening, everyone, and happy Independence Day. So you're right, Godfrey. The last time I joined you guys, I was in Gothenburg, with the comfortable of having speedy Swedish internet. Today, I'm joining from Western Ghana, where connection is an issue, only can be available through audio. A little bit about me. I'm a Tanzanian scholar. My research is very much on the political economy of Tanzania. You can see I have researched a lot on things like mining and land and politics and so much on Tanzania. But recently, I've just started a new project in Ghana looking at the politics of renewable energy in Ghana. Ghana is in the news. I'm sure you guys know, big day yesterday where they had an election and a new government is coming in. So Godfrey, back to you, and looking forward to the discussion tonight.
Thank you for that short introduction, Thabit. Yeah, so this topic, the mega projects, I think we all know of several projects that have been running in Tanzania in the past. So we look at still running. I think we've looked at the Julius Nyerere hydro power project. We've looked at, of course, the Bagamoyo port development project. So there's several different projects, but our main focus for today is, of course, the SGR, so standard gauge railway, and also looking at, of course, the extension of the TAZARA, what it means. Yeah. So maybe for the viewers or listeners that haven't heard about this project, can you just give us a small overview of the project a bit? So what is SGR and in its construction timeline and maybe the costs, so people just get a brief overview of this?
Yeah, no, thanks. I'm not getting into the sort of technical details, but SGR, as the name suggests, standard gauge railway. So it's sort of modern electric high-speed railway, which is obviously new in Tanzania. The current Tanzania SGR starts from Dar es Salaam to Mwanza. The only section that operates at the moment is the Dodoma section, and there are plans to extend it to other neighboring countries. The current SGR is designed to run, I think, the speed about 160 kilometers an hour, which, if you look at if you compare with the rest of the continent, the fastest train at the moment on the continent is the Casablanca train in Morocco, which was unveiled in 2018. It goes for 120 kilometers an hour. So if the SGR is going to be operational as it was designed, it should be like the second fastest train on the continent. But I should say, Godfrey, that before the SGR, Tanzania was running two other railway systems, what we call the meter gauge system, or the MGR, which is about 2,700 kilometers, and then the TAZARA Railway, which is technically called the Cape Gauge Railway. And you asked a bit about the timeline. I'm a political economist, and we love to get into history, but I don't want to bore you with the history, but I think it's important to give a bit of a sort of like historical overview. That the whole idea of SGR goes back to the days of Mkapa. In 1999, Mkapa started a discussion about what was then called the East African Community Railway Master Plan, which also included the idea of SGR. And then when President Kikwete came in, he started sort of like the initial feasibility studies. And then Kikwete left and Magufuli came in, and Magufuli is the one who mobilized the financing, and he started construction in May 2017. And then President Samia came in and just took off from where Magufuli left and completed the project this year.
Okay.
Yeah, and because you also hinted at the costs. So the cost question is a bit controversial, to be honest, and it depends on who you ask. So according to the government, because so let's go with the sort of like the official figure, if you like. When President Samia was launching the SGR, she basically said that the entire cost of the project was 23.3 trillion T shillings, which is roughly about $9 billion, or like 0.8 billion euros, somewhere there, under the current exchange rate. Yeah. But if you talk, I've been in touch with other analysts and some consultants who believe the cost could be a bit more than that, perhaps beyond 10 billion USD, somewhere there.
Okay. A costful project compared to the others that we've been having in the past.
Yeah.
And maybe just before we go to the details of maybe the costs and everything, the financing of this, based on your experience, how is the acceptance of or what you've had probably? How is the acceptance of this project of the train, and how is it? Who uses this kind of train? Because if it's the costs are that high, what are we looking at in terms of train tickets? How affordable is it for the general public as well?
Yeah, so based on what has been reported in the news and also based on some anecdotes that I've had, the response from the public has been overwhelming. People love the whole project, or at least the train itself. And I think the response has been quite positive. Some people are saying sort of like SGR is kind of creating a new sense of patriotism and nationalism, if you like. And in terms of who is using it, so as you know, currently it's only passengers. I think the Tanzania Railway Corporation, the state-owned company which runs SGR, is planning to start cargo services next year. So far it's only passengers. And in terms of, you ask about affordability. If you look at the official prices, prices are ranging from 13,000 T shillings, that's like 5 euros, to 150,000, like the more luxurious trains, which is like 55 euros. And like they needs to give some numbers recently. I'm trying to see if I can recall the numbers. Yeah, they said between June and October, I think about 45,000 people were saved by the trains. And then they're talking about 4,000 daily passengers between Dar and Morogoro routes.
Okay.
And then the state-owned company TRC claimed that it has collected, in that period of 4 months, it has collected 4.7 billion T shillings from ticket sales. And then, the big story is that, the train has cut down travel time, at least from Dar to Dodoma, from 9 to 6 hours. The thing that struck me when they gave out these numbers, this was just 3 weeks ago, if I recall.
Yes.
So, they talked about some really impressive numbers, including 15.7 billion revenue collection, but they didn't mention anything about operational costs,
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. And then the other thing, which I'm sure people who have been following events in Tanzania will know, is that there have been a lot of disruptions on this train, especially the Dar-Dodoma one. So there have been a lot of stoppages. There have been a lot of, trains stopping. Sometimes the stories have been, one is that, there's no power. There's also been stories of people sabotaging the infrastructure. Along the lines. Yeah, but that's kind of like the overview, if you like.
Okay, thank you for that small summary. I think, I also heard about, of course, I haven't used it by myself, but I went from Dar es Salaam to Morogoro in about 90 minutes instead of when you use the bus. I think we're talking about 4 to 5 hours. So that's pretty impressive when it comes to this. Yeah, and like we know of all the of all such big projects. I think, what can you mention anything in terms of economic benefits and that you can mention out of this project, or any kind of business opportunities that are emerging?
Yeah, so on the cargo, to be fair, so the story is that the state-owned company TRC, it has ordered, I think, like 200 plus cargo wagons from China. So the story is that they should arrive at some point next year. So that will start. But I mean, I don't want to repeat the government narrative. I don't want to be like a government spokesperson, if you like. But the story so far, what we hear about sort of like the benefits that are being reported, Nkumbo, the minister recently, he was out saying that the project has created about 30,000 direct jobs. And almost about 150,000 indirect jobs. The big story has been boosting local manufacturing, especially cement and steel.
For the rail construction?
Yeah, during construction. So the steel industry and the cement industry have been some of the biggest beneficiaries. And of course, as you have talked about, people are talking about improved connectivity. It's much easier and faster to travel now. So cutting down travel time, improving domestic trade. And then there's a talk, I was having a chat recently with somebody from the Tanzania Private Sector Foundation, and he was telling me, I think they see SGR as kind of like, if everything goes well, it should position Tanzania as kind of like a transport and logistical hub in the region, I suppose, competing with Kenya. Yeah, so I think there's that kind of potential, but Tanzania is always a land of so many potential. So the question is, are we going to live up to that potential? That's a whole different story.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think the advantage that Tanzania has as well, the fact that we have the access to the port. So I think linking all these landlocked countries like Rwanda, Burundi to the coast, of course, will give a huge benefit to the entire region as well. I think there should be a good chance for this. But maybe if you look at this, like we know all these mega projects, I think we see them everywhere in Tanzania or even here in Germany or anywhere. Yeah, so maybe can you just give us a hint on the like the negative impact or challenges after such projects, especially these SGR projects that you'd like to share with us?
Yeah, so before I get into that, I think the most alarming thing for me is I was going through. I'm a big fan. So there's an office in Tanzania called the Auditor General's Office, what people call it the CIG office. Maybe I'm sure you know the name.
Yes.
So for the rest of the audience, this is a National Auditor's Office. What this office does, it does auditing of all the government projects every year and publish reports every year, right? In 2021, the Office of the Auditor General published a report about the SGR, and the main thing that I think it's something to worry about as far as negative impacts are concerned is that it said the project actually started without any environmental impact and social assessment study. And actually the report, which I'm happy to share if people want to, it goes further to say that, because the official construction started in May 2017. And the environmental and social impact study was conducted or started in November 2018. So almost over a year later. Yeah?
A year later. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so as you guys will know, that such kind of projects requires, a deep, thorough environmental studies before they begin. But this doesn't surprise people like me. A lot of these happened under President Magufuli, who had many nicknames. One of his famous nicknames was the bulldozer, if some of you may recall. And President Magufuli kind of liked to bulldoze things. So the Nyerere hydropower plant, also the environmental and social impact report was basically fast-tracked. It was so quick just to please the public. But here, like the key point I want to point out is that the Auditor General pointed out that the project actually started without an environmental and impact assessment study, which I think it's something to worry about in the future. But more broadly, if you think about some of the negative impact that at least the report talks about, which a lot of them are basically during construction, and then I'll say a few of them after the construction. So there have been a lot of displacement, as you know, which I think is normal when this national big project comes in. Some people have to pave way for such projects. The problem has been delayed compensation. Some communities
finding places for them, providing solutions for them. Understand?
Correct. Yeah. So there have been a question of delayed compensation, and some people have also said some of those who've been paid have basically said the compensation rates have been very low.
Mm-hmm.
But the story has been, most people have been told that they should not complain. They should be patriotic because this is a national project. So, and this is normal in most African countries, these big infrastructure projects are sort of like framed as national projects, and nobody should sort of like resist them. So people have been told, if you've not been compensated, just sit and wait, don't complain, try to be patriotic. This is a national project. The other story I've had is that, during construction, there's been a story of rising prices of goods and services along the construction lines. You remember the company that was behind this construction was a Turkish company, Yepi Merkez, and there were stories of like a lot of these Turkish expatriates were paid some really expensive salaries. So they kind of inflated the local economies, if you like.
Mm-hmm.
And there's stories about, so the Auditor General report talks about environmental pollution and poor waste management. So that is what happened.
You mean during construction?
Correct, during construction.
Okay, understood.
And also some impacts on vegetation and stuff like that. So that's what we know. But I just want to say a few things on what could be the negative impact maybe in the future, which I think the biggest one for me is, like I say, the environmental and social impact study was done over a year later, yeah? And this is very worrying. So it doesn't paint a very good picture in the future. So I anticipate some environmental and social related problems to come in the future. Of course, now that the train that is running, the other problem I see is just kind of like the complete disruption of the transport sector, especially truck owners and regional bus owners. I think they're already feeling the pinch. I mean, the truck owners will feel the pinch when the cargo
And the
services
cargo is running, yeah.
exactly, yeah. Yeah. And then the big thing which we can discuss later is also like going forward, sort of like the commercial viability of the operation. So neighboring Kenya, as you know, has got its own SGR, and I think the Kenyan SGR didn't make any profit for the first 5 years. And in Tanzania, most of these state-owned companies, which I study quite a lot of them, most of them are notorious for just making losses. Just to give you an example, for instance, the national airline has not made any profit since 2011. That's the last time. So I think there's a question there of how viable they can be, and we can talk about the cost and debts, because I think you had some question about debt and stuff like that.
Yeah. That's an interesting point. I mean, you mentioned the last point. You mentioned about the Turkish company that was involved in the whole project. I don't know. Can you give us a hint maybe for everybody to know who financed this project? And I mean, like you mentioned, so normally such projects are always associated with a lot of debt funding and everything. So can you maybe just give us a hint on the financial aspect of this project?
Yeah. So I mean, I should start by saying there's been a lot of misconception about the financing. So in the days of the former President Magufuli, the main headline was that SGR was fully financed by the government of Tanzania.
Yeah.
That was like, there's a story of like, I'm sure you have a lot of Swahili speakers here, so there's a story of like, hii ni serikali inayojitosheleza, hizi ni pesa za ndani, and there was a very famous. There's a time Tanzania was hosting a Nordic Africa summit, and there was a big billboard which says Tanzania and nchi tajiri, which basically Tanzania is a rich country, yeah. But anyway, let's get into the details. So it's true that the government of Tanzania did commit some of its own domestic resources in the SGR project, yeah.
Yes.
But the overall construction and most of the financing has involved a mix of domestic financing, a mix of commercial lenders, and also foreign governments. I can just give you a few of the names I have. The biggest one, including the likes of Standard Chartered Bank, the China's state-owned Sinosure. This is a big Chinese insurance and banking company. The Denmark Export Credit Agency. So the Danish have also chipped in. The Swedish have also done it with their own national export credit agency as well. And I saw recently both the Swedish ambassador and the Danish ambassador actually cheering and kind of feeling that they were part of the process. And also the Eastern and Southern African Trade and Development Bank as well. So there's quite a mix of financial players involved in the process.
So that means if you're looking at this, what impact does this have on the national debt and the dependencies, including, for example, if you compare it with the Mombasa-Nairobi project, because like you said, I think 5 years you said it was making losses, but what does this mean for us? What the impact on the national debt for such a project then?
Yeah, so this is where it gets really depressing, because the national debt keeps on increasing, obviously because of borrowing. And I think the problem during the Magufuli time was actually, the problem was not borrowing, but actually the approach. So the Magufuli government opted to go for what we call commercial loans, which tend to be high interest loans. They also tend to have very short maturity period. And I think, to be fair, President Samia has sort of like saying that the government will not take this route anymore. So I think he's also learning from the mistakes. So just to give you an example, for instance, the government took a secret, it was a secret, but then we came to know later, it took a 1.5 billion USD high interest loan from Standard Chartered Bank. And this was such a loan with a very high interest and such a very short maturity period. So, and I think that's the only thing we know. So there are a lot of other loans that actually we don't know, because most of these, as you know, most of these contracting loans are quite secret in many ways. The implication on the national debt is actually massive. So I was looking at the numbers. According to the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, at the end of last year, at the end of 2023, Tanzania's public debt was 45.7% of the GDP, which is not a very great number. It's quite a depressing number.
Yeah.
And I was looking at the budget that the minister presented this year. So the current budget which was presented this year, so the budget stands at 49.3 trillion T shillings. And out of the 49 trillion, 13.1 trillion was actually allocated to do what we call debt servicing, which is basically repaying the debt. So to try to put some context into that, because I know numbers can be a bit confusing. That basically means 26% of the budget, of the entire budget this year, yeah?
And debt financing.
Yeah, it goes into debt servicing. And this is, for average folks, this is money that otherwise would go to finance social services, like education and health and stuff like that. But is actually going to pay debts. So the numbers I've shared there are quite depressing, and I think the state of the national debt is not great. And you wanted me to make some comparison with Kenya. So this is a little bit tricky because in Kenya, the SGR contracts leaked. And then when they leaked, Kenyans were able to scrutinize the details, yeah? And I think the conclusion in Kenya was that the Kenyans got a very bad deal from the Chinese, yeah?
Okay.
The loans are not great. And I think, but the point here is that the Kenyans were able to see that because the contract actually leaked. But in Tanzania, a lot of these contracts remain top secret. So we can only speculate, and I'm not a big fan of speculation. But I think one thing we know for sure is that commercial loans have got very high interest. If it happens one day, these contracts come to be public, I think we'll get to know that we got a very bad deal.
And I have just two questions from our viewers here. So one of them is, you talked about the environmental assessment, which was missing prior to the project. I think you also hinted a bit on to answer this question. What are the environmental problems do you anticipate from that lack of that assessment that should have been done before the project?
Yeah. So I'm not a sort of like a classic environmental impact assessment and expert, but I'll just share some thoughts. And before that, we should remember that like I said, the Nyerere hydropower projects had a similar sort of experience, and it's been facing, recurrent floods in Rufiji. Yeah. And a lot of experts actually believe that could have been avoided if the EIA, or the environmental impact study, was done properly. Because again, I don't want to get into the technicalities, but EIA, the study is supposed to be done to identify what are the potential environmental and social problems and how can you mitigate them, or sort of like, reduce them. So we know the SGR project is sort of like, it goes through land, it goes through vegetation. So we are anticipating problems to do with soil. We are anticipating problems to do with erosion. I anticipate problems to do with vegetation. Because like I say, the 2021 report by the Auditor General kind of gives some hints. I can speculate. The Auditor General actually did a study and visited the site. And I think he paints a very bad picture. But I should remind people, so the 2021 report was done, but it was actually done a year before. And just to give you a bit of the flavor of the politics, the former Auditor General was actually sacked by Magufuli, if you guys may recall. This is Professor Assad. Because he was very, very professional, very objective, and also very critical of the government. So he was actually forced to retire. So I see there's another question here. I think this is Fergus who's asking this question. Yeah, so there's a story of extending a chunk of the SGR to areas connecting Rwanda and Burundi. The nickel question is a little bit, there's a bit of a geopolitical mess because the company involved in the nickel project in Kabanga is an American company. And I'm actually planning, because you asked me about I'll talk a little bit about the geopolitical tension I see between the European Union, the Americans, and the Chinese, because I think, in my view, the revival of TAZARA is actually sort of like a counter move by the Chinese to counter the Americans, who have also building their own railway in Angola. But Fergus, I don't want to speculate, but I won't be surprised if it goes all the way to connect the nickel-rich area. Nickel, just to tell people, nickel is this very important critical mineral, which is very important for electric vehicles. And I think Tanzania is going to be one of the, at least Africa's biggest producers of nickel. Yeah, but I don't want to get into speculation, because, I would rather just speak of what I know and don't get into much speculations.
Okay. Yeah. And then the other question that is still open from viewers is, often such major projects face problems with operation and maintenance. So is the Turkish firm involved in the operation and maintenance as well? If yes, for how long? Yeah, so again, that is something that we can only speculate. The official information we know is that the Turkish are only involved in the construction. So they're not doing any operational management or anything else.
And I just gave you a hint, when the minister gave some numbers last week, talk about these impressive passenger numbers and also like the 15.7 billion T shillings in revenues. He didn't say anything about operation costs.
Yes.
I mean, if you know simple business, you calculate your whatever profit based on
Your
how much
revenue and then your operating costs. Yeah.
Exactly. So there's nothing on operation cost. But to be fair, is that the Turkish company, which is also to be fair, so YEP Americas is a global construction multinational, very reputable company, to be fair to them. But what we know so far, they are only involved in construction and not on operation and management.
So the entire operation is basically on the Tanzania Railway Corporation.
Yeah, there's a joke. I've seen people making jokes online recently that the operation is very much under the state-owned Tanzania Railway Corporation.
Mm-hmm.
So as you know, recently, there's a question of state capacity, and this is my area of research. So how much the Tanzanian state has the capacity to run this project? Yeah. So people were making jokes that Tanzania has given away the Dar es Salaam port to Dubai, DP World investors. I'm sure you guys know that the Dar es Salaam rapid bus transit system, I think, is under foreign ownership at the moment. And people are speculating because, like I told you, since the SGR has been running, there's been a lot of stoppages and frustration. And people are saying, we're not surprised a few months from now, a foreign owner is going to be invited to be running this train. That's what people are saying, which kind of tells you that people are very skeptical about the capacity of the Tanzanian state to run the project. Yeah, so I mean, the jury's out. So let's just wait and see. But I think it's going to be a shame.
Yeah, I would definitely think so. But maybe just for our viewers, just out of what we just said, what is really the main cause? I don't think it's about the competence, because I think we do have very competent people. But what is mostly the issue? Not just in Tanzania, but in African or most African countries, the issue in terms of those kind of coming up with such projects. What is the main cause that some of these projects are failing or having these issues?
I mean, it's hard to speculate. One thing we know is that there are very few African countries that have actually what we call state capacity to operate such, So to give you an example in Kenya, so somebody asked the question of operation and management. In Kenya, in East Africa, if you talk about state capacity, people talk about Rwanda, which is kind of like seen as a very capable state, very authoritarian, but very capable. So you can debate the authoritarian bit, but it's kind of like a state which actually get things done. In Kenya, Tanzanians look up to Kenya as kind of like a very capable state, yeah? But actually Kenya gave away the operation of the SGR to the Chinese because they thought like the Kenyan authorities could not do it on their own. So I think my point is that, over the years, African government have not invested in state capacity. And I think when I talk about state capacity here, I mean, having infrastructure, having the technical know-how, having the right people to do it. So I think there are very few success stories, and I think you can talk about Morocco, for instance, a bit in South Africa, Egypt. They're very small pockets where I mentioned Rwanda, Mauritius. Those are kind of like very small samples where actually governments or states are actually capable and they're delivering. So the joke people are making about, don't be surprised the Tanzania Railway Corporation is going to seize the operation of SGR and give it up to a foreign operator. I won't be surprised if that happens. Of course, politically, it's going to be very popular for the president. As some of you will remember, the DP World was sort of like politically very unpopular. So if this happens again, it's just going to add into the unpopularity, if you like.
Yeah. I think that's something that the government can't really afford at the moment. Yeah.
But But I should say also that I've been to some horrible running trains in Europe as well. So just to say that.
Yeah, definitely. I think we can. I mean, in Germany we also have the Deutsche Bahn as well. Also has these issues. I think look at the Lufthansa Airlines also has a few issues. So I think we have a few examples here as well that we can talk about. So it's not really an easy thing to run, I would say, such big projects. In the interest of, in the light of time that we have, maybe you can just jump just briefly into the TAZARA line renewal. Maybe can you give us, I think that was the most popular kind of connection that we had before the SGR came in. Can you share some light on what is planned at the moment and who is investing under what terms for the TAZARA line renewal?
Yeah, so I think on TAZARA, there's not so much information. So what we know so far is that in September, so there's the China-Africa Summit in Beijing. And during the summit, so Tanzania, Zambia, and China signed a memorandum of understanding to revitalize TAZARA. And I think they issued a press release. So this was Xi Jinping, Samia, and Kande Chilema. And the story was that the three countries are planning to revitalize TAZARA to increase the annual capacity, I think, from 500,000 right now to 2 million annually. So that's the storyline. And I think in terms of who is investing and sort of like what terms, we don't know yet. I suspect the money will come from Chinese state-owned banks, just like many other Chinese finance projects. And there's some rumors that TAZARA is currently actually negotiating with the China Civil Engineering and Construction Company. This is a huge Chinese engineering company. So TAZARA is actually engaging this or negotiating with these guys to be sort of like the potential contractor. And then somebody asked the question of operation and maintenance, right? There were rumors that part of the plans to revitalize TAZARA is also like China is going to take over, is planning to take over the operations. But the Chinese ambassador to Tanzania actually denied it strongly on Twitter, I think a few months ago. She said that the ownership structure will not change because the railway still belongs to Tanzania and Zambia, so the Chinese will not take over the ownership. But like I mentioned, and this kind of answers Fegu's question. So my feeling is that the timing of this announcement is quite telling, if you ask me, Godfrey, and the rest of the audience, because I see sort of like a broader geopolitical competition here between China and America. Because the US is financing a corridor in Angola, Zambia, and DRC. It's called the Lobito Corridor. So this is an infrastructure corridor which includes a 1,300-kilometer railway line, which connects Angola, DRC, and Zambia. And I think the railway is kind of like seen as sort of like a vehicle for the US and the European Union to tap into critical minerals in Angola, Zambia, and DRC. So we're talking about copper, we're talking about cobalt. These are like very important critical minerals that are high in demand at the moment. Yeah. So President Joe Biden was in Angola last week. This is like, I think he's probably his last official trip. He was in Angola to launch this corridor. I mean, I was like, the timing is quite interesting. I think the goal, I see the US move here is basically to counter the China's dominance in the region. And then the Chinese sort of like responded by announcing that they're also going to expand TAZARA, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think there's a bit of a geopolitical tension, which I think Fergus asked the question that, what if the Chinese get the contracts all the way to the nickel-rich area that is in Kigoma, that's the Kabanga nickel area. And then he was asking that maybe the US will be a US company. I see that potential tension in the future. So you'd expect a lot of that geopolitical rivalry. So it's kind of a shame. I think Tanzania find itself sandwiched, if you like, between these global rival powers. And we'll see how it goes, whether the Chinese or the Americans will come on top. My hunch is that the Chinese have been on the continent for quite some time, and the Americans and the Europeans are just waking up at the moment. The Chinese did their homework. They have invested in some of this infrastructure project, in some of these minerals we're talking about 10, 15 years ago. And Europe has unveiled what they call the European Green Deal, which needs a lot of these minerals. The US have got what they call the US Inflation Reduction Act, this big government stimulus package. So I think there's clearly a huge geopolitical tension, which I think we should just watch and see how it plays out.
Okay. Yeah. So this I think your final remark is what also was leading to my second last question about regional integration, how this project regional integration and the connectivity. Yeah, I think not only looking at the foreign powers more or less, the competition amongst each other, but also looking at the countries where the projects are being run as well.
Yeah, I think if the connection could go all the way to the sort of like the unlocked market like Rwanda, Burundi, DRC is also now officially a member of the East African community. And also, to be fair, on the technology and the design, the Tanzanian SGR, if it can operate as designed, is way much better than the Kenyan SGR. So again, we're talking about the potential, and we're talking about big if this really happens, and if the Dodoma Mwanza connection comes in, and then the sort of like the extension towards Rwanda and Burundi, the potential for regional integration is massive. There's no doubt.
Thank you. And yeah, so I don't see no further questions from the audience. But before we finish it up, I just want to hear your kind of final remarks. Or what's the way forward? How should such projects be run in Tanzania? What's the way forward for such kind of projects going forward? I think lessons learned maybe that you can share.
Yeah, I mean, so the first is like technically, if you miss out environmental impacts and social studies, that's like a big mess to start with, yeah. And that's something that I really worry about. I think a lot in the future because, like I said, it's very clear that the project started way before that, and then the EIA was done a year later. So I think that is quite worrying. So the challenge with this project is that they are always framed under sort of like broader, grand nationalistic project. Everybody should support them. Nobody should be critical. You remember the thing with the hydro dam minister. I think it was Kangi Lugola. He said, if you're going to criticize the dam, you're going to jail. This was back then. So the challenge with this project is that they are framed under sort of like broader nationalistic vision. There's a story about patriotism and nationalism, and nobody should question and nobody should critique. But I think the best way to go about this is, first of all, to go through a thorough environmental and social impact study to make sure that communities that are displaced are compensated in time. Again, this is the Tanzanian constitution makes it very clear that if somebody is displaced out of any infrastructure project, deserves a fair and timely compensation. So that has to happen. I think, to be fair, the president has admitted that she's going to work on those things. But like I said, you hear these stories about people should not complain. They should be supportive of SGR. Like I said, it's kind of creating a new sense of like almost fake patriotism, if you like.
Yeah.
I mean, it's okay for people to be patriotic and support the project, but sometimes when it feels like it's kind of like it's being imposed. And then the other best practice, like I say, is when you're looking for financing, go for the best practice. Don't go for high commercial loans, which are not very good for a country like Tanzania, which relies on donor funding and national debt is rising every day. That's not the good way to go about it. And I think, to be fair, I'm told the people at the Ministry of Finance will not do that again, because I think they've realized it's a mistake. So let's hope that will not that will not happen again.
Yeah.
And then the other thing, my general feeling is like I felt so we discussed a bit about the question of state capacity and how much the TRC, the company that is running the SGR, how much is it ready to do this? Yeah, I understand we should know that. Again, I'm a political economist, so the timing is always interesting. Remember, the unveiling was done a few months before the local elections because the president and the ruling party wanted to show something, that this is the government that is working, this is the government that is active. Yeah. And then next year is a general election year. If you ask me, the point I'm trying to say here is that I feel like they could have waited a bit to get everything in order, if you like.
Yeah.
Because like I told you, there have been so many, people getting really frustrated, so many stoppages, so many delays, so many sabotages, quote unquote. Perhaps they could have waited a bit and make sure that everything is in order, every system is in order. But I think there's also that political pressure because, again, President Samia, she has sort of like inherited a lot of what people consider Magufuli projects. She has, sometimes I feel like she feels like she has nothing to show on what she has done herself. And I think there's always pressure to show that the government is doing this and the government has done this. So, yeah, but I don't want to keep on rambling because I have been very critical. But I think in today's discussion, I've tried to be as a professional and also critical where I'm supposed to be.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's a perfect way to end this. I think it was from my side is very constructive discussion, especially sharing the insights of the different aspects, not only just the negative but also the positive things that are said with this project. I think our audience has been able to take a lot. Maybe just for those who haven't seen anything about this project, I think there's a lot of YouTube videos that you can have a look at how the train looks like and how the infrastructure have been set up. I think there's a lot of videos that are being shown in social media. Yeah, Thabit, as always, thank you very much for this interesting discussion. Yeah, always interesting getting input from your side as well. And thank you very much for your time.